Everyone. I call to order the April 1st, 2021 Ways and Means Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Chairwoman Sims.
Here.
Chairman Gould.
Alderman Gould?
I mean,
Yes.
Alderman Gould, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm looking
No,
at the wrong stuff
cartoon.
here. Alderwoman Tice.
Here.
And Alderwoman O'Neill. Not here.
Okay, thank you. The next item is approval or amendment of the agenda. Bola, do we have some housekeeping things to do with this, like moving around a subject?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want me to do that, Bola?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's a couple of housekeeping things. The items that are listed in item 3A, B, and C are not relevant to announcements, appointments, proclamations, and really should be moved to the city administrator report. So I move that we shift item 3C to be new item 5A and 3A and 3B items 5B and C respectively. I need a second.
Second. Sorry.
Okay, great. There's been a motion by Alderman Gould to make an amendment to the agenda and a second by Alderwoman Tice. Any discussion? Any objection to approving by acclamation? Great, it'll stand approved. Then is there any objection to approval of the agenda as amended? Any objection to approving by acclamation? Seeing none, that'll be approved. Item number, so now as item 3, we have no announcements, appointments, or proclamations or recognitions. Item number 4 would be the report of the committee chair and alderman. I do not have a report. Alderman Gould.
No report.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Absent.
Absent. Alderwoman Parker Tice.
No report.
Thank you. Item 5, we don't have any city administrator reports. Item 6, we don't have any department reports.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh, sorry, I was
Item-
doing it Evelyn Wood style. I gotta have myself.
Yeah, item 5 is where we're going to start with.
Oh, sorry.
agenda.
Sorry, it's
Item
me.
5 is now, 5A is the old.
First, yeah, no, first time handling an agenda. Sorry, guys. All right, so item 5A, which is the old 3C, and that is continued discussion on the compensation and benefit study report. The reason why this is coming at the top of the line is that we have limited time with our subject matter expert tonight, and so we may need to we may need additional time, and we wanted to get those dates set. So there are, for a subsequent Ways and Means Committee meeting, if we need one to continue this discussion. Did everybody have an opportunity to see the available dates that were identified, specifically Thursday the 15th, Tuesday the 20th, Thursday the 22nd, and Tuesday the 27th? If I just arbitrarily led with April 15th, how does that date look to people? I'm seeing thumbs up. That date works for me.
Kathy said that works for her as well, but she has a meeting at 7. So as long as we're done by 7, that should work for her.
I'm willing to risk it and say we'll be done by 7.
Okay.
And then does that work for Ms. Higbee? Okay,
Yeah.
that date's been cleared. Okay, so we'll just go ahead. If we don't need the meeting, we'll cancel it, but we will have another committee meeting on the 15th at 5:30 if we need to continue the discussion. And as always, I thank everyone for making the time to commit to additional time. So now moving on to item 5B, which is the old 3A. That is continued discussion on the compensation and benefits study reports, 85th percentile presentation, and lump sum merit compensation. Who is leading us off on that topic?
Linda.
Great. Linda, you have the
That
floor.
would be me. Can you give Darren the screen?
He has.
I've got it.
Do that, yeah.
You've got it. All right. Awesome.
And just as
Okay,
a
so-
note, oh, hold on one second, Linda, sorry. In general, committee, if you've got questions, I think it worked the last time to, ask them as they come up. I guess we'll revise if we need to. But when she goes into this kind of screen, I have a limited ability to see you. So I guess speak up if I don't recognize you right away. It's because I'm not seeing you. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Last week when we ended, we had wanted to look at what the 85th percentile would look like. So here's our agenda for this evening. And again, we do kind of have a hard stop in an hour. So I want to see what we can get through. So the first thing I kind of want to lead off with is I got some feedback that there was sort of a need for a clarification. When I said last week that one of the philosophy items we were asked to look at was what philosophy might allow all employees to get a raise. And just a reminder to folks that at the City of Brentwood, you do performance appraisals, and people do have to have an acceptable performance appraisal in order to be raise eligible. So if for whoever sort of needed that clarification, I just wanted to make that. We were not suggesting that people get raises where they weren't entitled to them and had not earned them. So that's just a clarification I want to start with. The agenda tonight, again, is comparing the 75th and 85th. That was what we were asked to do when we left. And then what are the cost comparisons with that? What's really the change if you change that philosophy from the 75th to the 85th? And we wanted to do that for both uniform and non-uniform. We also indicated in that discussion last week that there might be an opportunity to, again, explore the idea of lump sum merits. And so we've done some work on that for you. You should also be aware that during the course of the week, 3 internal equity considerations came to our attention. We've done a little bit of work on those, and we have those on our agenda last because they weren't a part of what you asked us to do initially, but they factor into all the pieces we're going to be talking about tonight. So that's sort of our agenda. Those internal equity issues, we have 2 from the police department and 1 from the fire department. So those are the pieces that we have on the agenda tonight, provided we can get through what you originally asked us to do initially. So with that, let's kind of jump in. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but by no means does that mean we shouldn't slow me down if I'm moving a little too quickly tonight. Again, just for a refresher, we looked at the 75th percentile, standard deviation, no standard deviation, and initially our focus last week really was on that firefighter EMT, firefighter paramedic, again, where we had some concerns and issues around people who were bumping the top of the maximums and what would happen. So just a refresher here, firefighter EMT is less than 3 matches. That means it's always going to be an internal decision on where you set that range. The firefighter paramedic is getting, that maximum is going to increase by $4,048. Again, you can see those up at the top. If you use the standard deviation, it's $4,048. If you don't use the standard deviation, it's $5,065. Again, just a reminder, using the standard deviation is the best practice. It's your choice whether you follow that best practice. 75 without, again, the EMT ranges are going to go up by $2,037, and the firefighter paramedic would increase an additional $1,017 over using the standard deviation. So in this particular situation, it would be, the maximums would go up by not using a standard deviation. Okay. Questions on that before we move to the next one, because we were really comparing the 75th and 85th tonight. So this is kind of old data for us, but we want to make sure we don't give it short shrift.
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, let's move on then. Okay, so we wanted to look again at the 85th, and once again, because the final decision hasn't been made on standard deviation or no standard deviation, we did it both ways for you. Again, firefighter didn't change. You still only have 3 matches, less than 3 matches. And again, you get a little bit of bump in the increases, but it's not significant moving from the 75th to the 85th. Without standard deviation, you get a little better bump on the firefighter EMT because, of course, you don't exclude any ones that are out of range. And then the firefighter paramedic, again, goes up a small amount. But again, not a significant difference between the 75th and 85th in terms of what's happening there with those ranges. So let's take a look at what those ranges look like and what the cost would be. Darren? Okay, so now you can look at them all together. And again, we focused just on these because that's where we were kind of centered some of our discussion last week. Again, the placement 75th versus 85th, it really doesn't make much difference. Without the standard deviation, you're going to go a little bit higher, and it's a little higher than the 75th percentile, but again, the current incumbents are such that it doesn't really help the movement within the range or an increase to base pay. Paramedic, again, you're looking at a less than $500 and less than $600 difference with or without a standard deviation moving from the 75th to the 85th. So again, it is, from our perspective, and I think probably from yours as well, it is not a significant change to move from the 75th to the 85th in terms of affordability. When we look at the non-uniform, you're going to see something a little different, but again, still not significant when you look at it globally. Okay, Darren. Model range comparisons, all of them here together. Again, we also included that highest paid because that was one of the options that we talked about last week, so that you can look at that and compare that as well. We also had a question on the fire captain, so we put it in here as well for comparison purposes. Questions? So once again, just not looking at a big difference in terms of changing those ranges from the 75th to the 85th. So truly just a judgment call on where you want your philosophy to be. And again, the highest paid, if you're looking at it for comparison, you can see that the biggest difference there in terms of the jump would be to go to that highest paid, whether we're looking at minimums or maximums. But even then, if you're looking at a fire captain with me, for example, the difference between the 75th, the 85th, not much. As a matter of fact, the 85th, I think, gives us about a less than a $600 difference. If you go to the highest paid, it's a $2,000 difference. So again, just sort of for comparison purposes, take a look at that. And we're going to move on and talk about what the cost implications are once you start implementing these ranges and sort of how many people are still bumping the top of those ranges or the maximums. So just follow along with me here for a minute. When we look at employees at maximum right now, what happens if you apply the next highest step, or you adjust to make sure everybody gets at least 2.5%, or you go into the same step? So we want to make sure that we're looking at those. Once you give a raise in each of those scenarios in 2021, regardless of which one you follow, you're going to have some folks at the max of the range once you give that raise. So they're going to be bumping it at the top again. When we look at the next highest step, when we're looking at the cost implications, and I think this is really interesting if you'll follow with me on the models, we again included the highest max and highest min, just so that you could take a look at those. But if you look at the difference from the 75th to the 85th to the highest max, you really are seeing some difference, but it's not significant unless you use they have to get at least a 2.5% raise. And then you see a really big jump between the 85th and using the highest max in the match. So that's kind of I think same step is something that we've kind of taken off the table, but we wanted to continue to include that for you to take a look at. In this particular group of folks, this is all of your uniformed folks. When we look at the highest max, the way it's currently set up, you still are going to have some people at the high end of the range, or you're going to have them maxing out after they get their raise. So that's sort of that top line. You're still going to have some folks falling in there. But more importantly, when you look at the bottom, you have fewer people, as you would expect, if you use the highest max for your implementation. Highest max 75th, you have the 16. But between the 85th and the 75th, you're looking at the same number of people bumping the top of that range after they get their raise. And that's one more than you currently have today. The only difference is they were getting a raise in order to get there. Okay, Darren, let's go. The next one. I'm not seeing any waving arms, so we're going to continue to move. Again, this is just the uniform cost comparison. What happens with and without a standard deviation going on here for the 85th and 75th in terms of your overall cost of implementation? And again, what I'm seeing, everybody may be seeing something a little different. If you're using the standard deviation, you're still not talking about a big jump between the 75th and the 85th in terms of implementation. At 2.5, again, you're seeing a little bit of a jump, but again, it's only 8,000. So the only way you're hitting really large numbers is moving people into the same step, which gives some phenomenally big raises to do that with the change in marketplace. So again, just a reminder, the 85th, you're going to have 26 people sitting at maximum in the public safety section. If you use it without a standard deviation, it drops to 19 people. And the 75th is 26 and 22. And you're currently sitting at 25. So once again, you're not going to get a lot of, you're going to get a raise this year, then you're going to have people bumping the top again. Which is one of the reasons that we talked last week a little bit about lump sum merits and how those might help in terms of what the congestion at the top of your range is, if you will. So let's go take a look at some of that, Darren. I guess we have to talk about non-uniform first. Sorry, I was rushing us a little bit. So non-uniform, the difference between the next highest step, the 75th, and then again at the 85th, you're talking about 0.1%, or 63,000 versus 65,000. So again, that change in philosophy, not a big change. Where the big change comes here that you'd want to be aware of is at the 75th, with that change in range structure, you have 9 people who are below the minimum of their range and need raises versus 12 if you go to the 85th. So we've got a few more people who are dropping below minimum for the job that they are in if you go to the 85th. And remember that one of our rules, recommendations, however you want to express it, is you don't leave people sitting below the minimum of their range. So if you commit to the 85th, you are committing to getting those 12 individuals to the minimum of the job placement for that particular group. So even for this group, one of the interesting things to look at is next highest step, adjusted step, you're still looking at 3 to 5 people who after this raise are going to be bumping the top of their range. It's not a huge percentage, but it is 3 to 5 people. So the 85th is a 1.7% change in range structure over the 75th. So again, not quite a 2% move. Employees below the minimum is what increases, and that's what's important about all the data that you're looking at right now. Is you're grouping some additional people that are going to fall under the minimum of their range, their pay range. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands waving at me. Okay, let's talk about lump sum merits, because as we talked about last week, this is the way many communities have answered the call to, I have highly seasoned, experienced people, they've been with me a long time, and they're at the top of their range or bumping the top of their range, is that you give lump sum merits to those who are there and have had good performance appraisals. So that's the piece that I think is really key here. And we used just the 75th when we did our calculations. Obviously, these would change a little depending on the philosophy piece that you pick. But again, you'd be looking at people who have no increase to base because they are already at or above the new maximum. And that costs about $32,000 in one-time lump sum payments. If you wanted to ensure that everybody got at least 2.5, it increases that by about almost $14,000. So total in lump sums for uniform, you'd be looking at about $46,000, and that combined with your base increases would be about 102, almost 103. But for the non-uniform, again, you don't have anybody who isn't getting something. I mean, it may be $1 or whatever, but to get them to 2.5% is a $32,700 cost. So again, the total here is around $96,000. And over all of your population, it's $200,000, and that's your base increases as well as your lump sum merits. Questions for me? Okay, for uniform, it's 15 people who would be getting a lump sum with no base increase, and 16 additional people would be getting both a small adjustment to base to hit their next step or to hit the top step, and then an additional partial lump sum in order to reach 2.5%. For the non-uniform, you've got 38 people who would get a partial lump sum in order to get a full 2.5%.
And does everybody understand that, just in case you don't, you would get a base increase to the maximum of that range, and then anything needed to get you to a 2.5% increase would be lump sum. So for example, you could have 1% base pay increase and 1.5% of the lump sum. Just adding that clarity.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. All right. Shall we move on? I know that this is still an open decision for you guys. So at this juncture, we feel like you have some decisions to make. And the top one of that is, what philosophy do you want? 75th or 85th, with or without a standard deviation. Again, it's a philosophy decision. You can also still go with, we were sort of, this one seemed to be kind of moving off the table last week, but we would be remiss if we didn't, again, sort of had it out there. The highest comparator maximum. And then again, we put in lump sum merits. And I know that we were doing some check-in to see how you guys were going to fall on that. It is the way several cities within your comparator group are addressing the issue of folks at the maximum of their range. And then in terms of implementation strategy, you have some additional decisions that you're going to have to make. You're going to use the next highest step, or you're going to adjust the step so that everybody's getting at least 2.5. And will you or won't you be able to do lump sum merits? And that may be one of the key questions. And then, of course, I would be remiss, and Jason would probably jump in and say this if I didn't. You also still have a decision to make in terms of, when are you going to implement whatever you decide? Are you going to retro it back to January 1? Are you going to do it July 1st? And then again, my cautionary note that if you push the decision off to 2022, you're going to need some form of update to this data by then, because you do have folks who generally in anywhere from July to October may be adjusting their ranges again as well. I'm going to pause for breath. Questions?
Chairwoman
Alderman
Sims,
Gould.
this is Jeff. I don't know. You recognize me?
Yeah, Alderman Gould.
Okay. This question may be more for Bola or Jason, but as a matter of policy, if we were to implement any adjustments to things, can we, do a mid-year adjustment, meaning, July 1, as opposed to doing anything that's retro to January 1?
I'll start off. I just want to remind the board that all employees that qualified for a raise because of the outcome of their performance evaluation did receive a raise January 1, with the exception of those who had topped out of the pay scale.
Okay.
So it's been addressed so far this year. Now, if you choose, you could consider July 1 to give additional raises. That's what this would be. But for those who did not receive any raise, then you would be addressing their compensation one time. So I think we offered in the presentation last week, 3 dates that you all could consider. Jason, you want to highlight those three times?
Right. You could go back to January 1, at which point then we do a retroactive payment to all of the individuals to get them caught up. We could do a July 1, and provided the board kind of expedited things, we could do that without any need for retro. And then the alternative would be to be a 1/1 of next year. But as Linda said, there may need to be some reevaluation. And obviously with people moving in their pay grids, we'd have to re-examine what the total dollar figure would be. It should also be noted that if you go retroactive or if you go to July 1, those weren't necessarily budgeted items. So that information would have to be passed along to the finance department for the purposes of making a budget amendment.
Understood. Thank you.
Other questions?
Well, I have a few questions. Are you ready for me, Sunny?
Yeah,
Okay,
I-
good.
please
So
continue.
my first question is kind of for Linda, and it's a standard deviation 101 question that I should understand, but I just want to make sure I really understand. So you have the standard deviation. So you have a certain number of jobs in a category. So are you literally throwing out the top two and the bottom two, or do you then do some math to throw out everyone who's in those tails, or is it literally just the top two and the top bottom? Or is
No,
it
it's actually a calculation that you do. So in some cases, we don't have to throw out any because they're all within that norm. And in other cases, you do have the ones that fit on the tail. So sometimes it's one, sometimes it might be two on one end and one on the other end that are not within those norms. And so that's what we really do in terms of the standard deviation. And that's a part of what we looked at last week, where in this particular example that we used, we tried to get it balanced. So we were throwing out two of the lows and two of the highs, but it's all based on that calculation so that you're looking at the normative data, so that you're not leaving the really lows or the really highs. And the example I used is that when we did the same thing back in 2014, one of the easy ways of going with standard deviation is because it did allow some of those maximums to be higher, because you had some folks that had not adjusted their ranges in quite a while and they were pretty low. So we knocked out the lows and didn't have as many highs that had to be knocked out then. But basically what you're looking at is making sure that the data is within a normative group. Darren?
And Linda, I'm showing that from what we showed last time.
Okay,
great?
right.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Sims.
Yeah.
David Plufka has his hand raised.
We'll get through, David, I'll recognize you, but we're going to get through the committee questions first, but I certainly, we will get to you. Nancy, did you have other questions?
I do have other questions. So my first question is sort of a big picture philosophy question. So, and I've heard from some constituents on this. So a few years ago, the board came up with the philosophy of 75%. So now we're reconsidering that. And I guess I'm wondering what the reason is, and the same with the philosophy. Someone asked me, the desired objective is for all employees to be raise eligible. Maybe I missed it. I don't remember the board saying that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I don't remember us all agreeing that that was something that needed to be done. So I'm sort of wondering, I'm stepping up a little bit, looking over this conversation, trying to figure out like the philosophical piece. I know there's some problems that we're trying to solve, but are we changing a philosophy that makes sense in order to solve some problems that maybe there's some different way to solve? I don't know.
Let
who
me
should
tell
answer
you
that.
how we, okay, let's talk about how we came into this picture and what we did. When we initially looked at our proposal, one of the things in that discussion was, hey, if the market isn't changing, what can we do that might generate a salary increase for people who are performing but are already at the top of their range? So we went and looked at, okay, what happens at the 75th? Well, the ranges moved significantly for most jobs in the 75th. Your non-uniform moved 3%. Some of your uniform moved way more than that based on their comparator group. So you had some movement this year that was a little higher than normal. Again, so we then took a look at that and looked at your standard movement at the 75th percentile and said, it still doesn't answer the question for those folks who were at or over their range maximum. So we were the ones who went looking for, is there a philosophy that might allow you to give increases to all your increase eligible folks? And would it have to involve a change in philosophy? We're the ones who came back and said, if this is really an objective and you can't do lump sums, then the only philosophy we could come up with that would allow you to meet that one objective concern, if you will, was the meeting the highest comparator maximum, which then got you to the point where everybody got a raise at least this year. Now, even in that model, you'll remember that they get a raise this year, but then you're right back at maximum in the following year for several of your employees and for some classifications. So we're the folks who came back to you and said, if you're concerned and you really want people, if that's one of your concerns, the only philosophy change that really achieves that for you, if you can't do lump sum merit, is to match your highest comparator. But it doesn't solve the issue long term of people are not going to get raises every single year. That's the current market in terms of what's going on.
Because my concern,
And that's the lump sum merit discussion.
yeah, my concern, I'm going to may make some enemies here, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't agree that we should be the highest comparator maximum. I don't think it's right for Brentwood. I could not go out and argue to our citizens that we should, oh yeah, we had a good year with our taxes compared to our comparators, and we just decided to pay every employee the highest maximum compared to our comparators. I would have a hard time justifying that use of our tax dollars. I think there are issues, and I don't know how to get around solving some of the problems that we're hearing from some of our employees, if there is a good way. But I don't know, in my opinion, going to the highest maximum is not the way to solve that.
Ms. Higbee, as I reflected on this process, I recall back when we were doing this, I was new to the board. I wasn't a part of the 75th percentile discussion that I can remember. But I know that it came before the board, and I was a yes vote for developing a 95th percentile philosophy. Is it possible, since we have a meeting on the 15th, how hard would it be to run those numbers? You know, we wouldn't be the highest comparator, but we'd be in the 95th percentile, and maybe that would address some of our issues. You know, the ideas that we were kicking around that, you know, nothing had decided, obviously, but that uniform employees were treated potentially differently from non-uniform, and do we do this lump sum? I mean, I like the simplicity of having a percentile apply uniformly and to our employees. And I don't know what the numbers would look like at the 95th percentile. I think that, I mean, in terms of, you know, one of the many benefits of living in Brentwood, of having, you know, top grade services, I think is an incentive. I think police and fire issues that exist now didn't exist, you know, if we just look at our climate that exists, what our police in particular face and the difficulties that they face and what we ask them to do. I'm not decided yet, but I would like to see that that those numbers run, and maybe that might, you know, solve some of our issues. And if we, you know, at the end of the day, I like putting the numbers up on the board and picking them apart.
Sure.
So how hard is that to do?
Not hard, and you still have the budget with us in order to do that for the 15th. So we can run the 95th. I think one of the concerns, again, that we have is even using the highest, remember, you still are going to have people back in that same position after you give them a 2020 raise. So I think that the real solution here, if you can get it passed, is a lump sum merit, which allows you each year to recognize performance of long service, highly paid employees in a lump sum merit without any additive to base to continue growing that each year. So I think that's probably going to be your ultimate solution. But in terms of your question of running the 95th, piece of cake, we can do that for you.
Could
Alderwoman Tice?
So along with that, and this is probably a staff question, but sort of also looking at this up globally, like what percentage of our annual budget, sort of discounting Brentwood bound, is currently paid on employee salaries, and I'm sort of curious. I mean, I can see the dollar increases per year.
0.37,
I'm sorry,
70.37.
70.37
Yes.
currently.
Right. I can tell you the page in the budget.
Okay, it's probably, yeah, see, it's right here. Well, I'd be curious, like, what this does to that percentage of, because I also think our citizens, like, we want to really recognize and pay our hardworking staff, and uniform and non-uniform, but then we need to fill the potholes, and we don't, no, our employees are used to having potholes filled and sidewalks.
29.
So, I'm sorry?
Page 29 of the budget, 2021 budget book.
Perfect. Oh, there it is, yeah.
Alderman Gould.
Yeah, I mean, I assume if there's budget still to run the 95th, okay, but I feel like we've got enough data here. In my opinion, there's enough data here that's telling us there isn't really significant moves that are being made, even from 75th to the 85th, and then there is a massive jump to when we go to the highest maximum and minimum. But we're still not addressing the problem that seems to be driving the need to reevaluate. What I feel was I wasn't part of it at all, but having seen some of the data over the past week of the historicals of what decisions were made back in 2015, it was a very reasoned and I thought a very appropriate philosophy that was applied. And so I'm not convinced that I'm seeing any data here that drives me to say, oh yeah, let's go ahead and shift it. I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I'm also not seeing the fact that we're having trouble retaining employees or attracting new employees. I feel like we've got strong retention and loyalty in the town, and so it's not like we now need to make a drastic shift that's going to add a significant amount to our overall budget that we haven't budgeted for this year, and certainly don't have it in the budget, in perpetuity for this. And I really, really hate to get to a point where we've over budgeted to where we have to start looking at reducing staff because we're paying staff more. That's a bad situation. So I feel like it's a very reasoned situation where we have right now, and the solution that Linda is offering up, if there's a legal way that we are able to identify funding, especially if it's funding that's been provided to us from COVID assistance or something like that, if that's able to be leveraged, especially this year, to recognize those that are at the highest levels or the most loyal and the conditions that they had to work in. I think that's the fairest to all parties involved way to solve this without drastically changing our philosophy. That's my opinion.
Well, I'd have to respectfully disagree with you, Alderman Gould. I think the circumstances of 2015 versus now are dramatically different. We have a use tax, we have Prop P, we have the events that have unfolded in our society that I think a lot more is being, and we are asking, if I think of the police, what we ask of the police now is far more than what we did previously. So I think a lot has changed. We're not putting it to a vote. But I would request that we at least see what the numbers look like, and then we can hash out, and hopefully we, after debate, zero in on a philosophy that we would recommend to the board, and then we can have a full-throated debate at that level as well. So those are my 2 cents. Alderman Plufka, did you have raised your hand? I can't see him on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I really appreciate you let me listen to the debate. So my question for Linda would be, at what point do you think that the use of the standard deviation as a tool to implement philosophy no longer implements that philosophy, or that it actually works in the opposite direction? And by way of asking the question, let me just sort of go through the process as it pertains to firefighters. That's the best example I can see. And that's using your chart on page 7, Linda, from the original report that you provided us. It looks as though the 14 comparator cities, you have 6 of them are blank because those 6 communities belong to fire protection districts. Is that accurate?
Some of your comparators do not have fire departments at that city. That is correct.
Right. So they certainly have fire departments, but they're not municipal departments. They are, in fact, part of a larger fire protection district, right? I mean, they
most
have
of them are, to my knowledge, yeah. I'm not an expert in that area, but yes.
Okay. I mean, there are firefighters that are serving those communities, just not in the form of a municipal department.
Correct. They may be serving multiple communities. That's correct.
Okay. So of the remaining 8, you then applied, you figured the mean, you figured your target mean average income, and then you calculated the standard deviation, and then you threw out 4 more. So of the remaining 8 communities, the use of the standard deviation tool threw out half of those remaining communities, and you ended up drawing comparisons to only 4 communities out of an original 14. And if you add back in those firefighters that are parts of those fire protection districts, and if you add back in both the 2 lows and the 2 highs that were taken out for standard deviation, and you look at where Brentwood pays, Brentwood falls within the lower half of those 14 comparator cities. If you look at everything, and I realize protection districts to municipal fire departments are apples to oranges, and I'm not asking that we somehow change our thinking about that, but I am suggesting that perhaps our philosophy, as I understood it, and I was part of the original debate back in 2015, what was explained to me about the 75th percentile by both Mayor Thornton and by you was that would position us theoretically out of 14 communities. We would be paying better than 10 of them. And there would be 3 communities that would be theoretically paying better than us. In our current scenario, utilizing the 75th percentile and utilizing the 1 standard deviation calculation, there are 8 cities of those comparators that are paying better than our community, and only 6 that are paying less. And I don't understand how the operation of that formula somehow gets us to the philosophy of trying to be in the 75th percentile. And doesn't this mean in these instances that we ought to look at perhaps tweaking this philosophy in some way so that we continue to attract, because I think it was driven by the market economy. It was driven by the idea that if we were competitive or better than 10 of the 14 communities, we wouldn't be leading the market, and we wouldn't be unsustainable, and we wouldn't be, being a sort of a renegade community and paying in an unsustainable way. But by the same token, we would be competitive. I don't know that we're competitive, at least in that instance. So that my question has to do with
David, let me address a couple of things for you. First of all, we do not include fire districts, nor could we, and we asked that specific question of your comparator group if any of them use fire districts to help set their ranges, and the answer was a resounding no. We had 1 that did, and they always get thrown out for standard deviation. So again, fire districts are not a part of this equation. The reason we use standard deviation is because it is best practice. Yes, you wind up with 4. You always have to have at least 3 for it to be valid. You guys have the option as a philosophy not to use standard deviation. But again, remember that in 2014-15, when we looked at this, it was to the benefit of those employees because you had lots of folks who had very low, they hadn't adjusted their ranges in a while. So it worked in your favor. This year it doesn't. Of those who have fire departments, do I think this gives you a competitive range? Yes, you have no difficulty recruiting for fire. Most police departments right now are having difficulty recruiting. Fire is not. So again, from a recruitment and a retention standpoint, I don't have an argument for you for changing your philosophy or throwing out standard deviation. Philosophically, if you want to do that, you can. It's not best practice. But certainly you can use all 8 of them. And as you saw, going from the 75th to the 85th, it'll make a small difference for some,
Right.
but not for all positions.
Right. No, I can appreciate that, and I understand what you're saying. But where I have a disagreement with you, or at least that philosophically I seem to disagree, is that what you're not taking into account, I don't think at least, is a candidate comes out of the fire academy. That candidate is not limiting his search to just municipal fire departments. He or she is also looking at fire protection districts as a place of employment. And when they compare within our 14 so-called comparator cities, that half of those communities are served by fire protection districts, and we just write them off because we believe that philosophically it's not comparable. That doesn't mean that they're somehow saying, well, I'm only going to look at municipal fire departments. That's the only places I want to work. We're
David,
not,
please,
go ahead.
Sorry, but please remember that the city of Brentwood has lost 1 person to a fire protection district in the past however many years. And in addition, as you well know, fire districts are a legacy hire. You go on their books, and if you're a legacy, you move to the top very quickly, or as quickly as they can. But again, you're not losing people to fire districts, nor are you trying to recruit out of a fire district. So I think we need to table that discussion in terms of fire districts. We will do anything you direct us to, but from a market standpoint, I have no justification for any of your arguments regarding putting in fire districts. You don't recruit from the same pool, you don't retain. So you don't lose or hire people from those districts. And
Linda,
that's how you set your comparator group.
Linda, then how do we have 14? How can they be called comparator cities then? Why don't we choose municipalities that are actually comparable then? If it is so different, and I agree with you, it is different, and I'm not suggesting we change our philosophy to take this into account. I'm only trying to point out that when your remaining 8 communities, that half of them are taken out by a standard deviation calculation, that this is not, the standard deviation philosophy, as it was explained to me, was to rein in those renegade communities that were either paying so far above the market or so far below the market as to not be comparable. Well, does that still ring true when you exclude half of the remaining communities by the operation of standard deviation? Don't we somehow now get into a philosophy, or at least a situation where if we're taking away half our comparators by the implementation of a standard deviation tool, isn't that doing a lot more than just taking away quote unquote renegade or outside the norm communities? If there's 4 communities outside the so-called norm, shouldn't we be looking at what the norm actually is?
David, if you're looking at the whole city of Brentwood, not just fire, which is all you're focused on, we have matches within your group that 13 out of those 14 cities match, or 14 out of 14 have that role. So picking a group of comparators for one specific classification, I guess theoretically you could do that, but I've never known a city to do that. And that's really what you're suggesting.
I'm not, please understand, Linda, I'm not suggesting, I'm asking. I don't know. And if that's the answer, then that's the answer. I'm truly asking to try to understand where we go from here, because I agree with you that we need to do something that has more of a long-term effect than just trying to get by this year. And I appreciate both Alderman Gould's comments and Alderwoman Sims's comments. I thought they were both spot on, and I know they don't agree with each other, but I think they're both making a very relevant point. And all I'm trying to figure out is if our philosophy is not to lead the market, if our philosophy is 75th, that's the number we've chosen, then doesn't the use of the standard deviation tool simply blunt that ability further? Now, it's more dramatic in the case of the firefighters, but doesn't it also, to a lesser extent, also blunt that philosophy in every other category too?
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
Certainly, again, on your decision table, we have up there, are you going to use a standard deviation or aren't you? We can tell you it's best practice. You have to decide whether you're going to use it.
Okay.
And again, in this particular year for fire, absolutely, it created a lower maximum than you've had before. In the prior year, it actually, I think, raised it by $100 by using the standard deviation. So I think each year that argument could go either way for you, David. I think
Okay.
the city just has to make a decision on what you're going to do. Because your comparator group has been vetted a couple of times, and indeed you have classifications where all of those comparators match, or 13 out of the 14 can match to that group, I can't see a reason for changing your comparator group.
Okay, I really appreciate you taking the time and as much time as you have taken, and I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying. Sometimes perhaps my tone comes off as being more confrontational than it should be. I don't mean to suggest that, and I apologize if that's how you took it. I do appreciate you answering these questions. I really do. I would ask one thing, and my suggestion is, I don't know that it's absolutely true. I know we have not had a lot of loss, but you've said a couple of times now that we have had no trouble filling our positions with regard to police and fire. I know that Chief Cottrell's listening in on this meeting. I wonder if Chief Speece is too, and I'd ask the chair as I finish my question, whether she might recognize either or both of them to speak to that.
David, I want to correct a statement you just made. I said
Okay.
fire had not had any attraction or retention issues. Police haven't had retention issues, but every community I work with has police attraction issues solely based
Okay.
on what's going on culturally around the country right now.
Fair enough. You're right. You're right.
If I can chime in momentarily, one of the items a little bit later on in the agenda, I actually
Jason,
do.
hold on a second. We only have about 5 more minutes of Ms. Higbee. So to the extent that there are quant issues to get out or to address, I assume do that, and then I think when she has to leave, we can proceed with other matters. Were there other
No. Thank you,
other
Madam
issues?
Chairwoman. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll recognize everybody. I just want to be mindful that we have her for 6 more minutes.
Okay, with that in mind, can we move on to the internal equity issues, which again, I think get to some of the questions there. The internal equity considerations that we've been asked to look at, or that came up this week, was moving the corporal to equivalent to a fire lieutenant. Again, I would remind you, we had less than 3 matches with that standard deviation component in. So this is purely an internal equity issue. If you view them as equivalent, they should be equivalent. We can't weigh in on that because we don't have sufficient data to say yay or nay in that particular one. With that, second one is the police sergeant to a fire captain. We've got some data for you to look at. That's not the way your comparator cities view it. But again, if you guys view those as equivalent roles, that's an internal equity call. That has nothing to do with the data, that kind of thing. That's just purely there. The same thing that applies for the corporal applies for that firefighter EMT, where we've been asked to consider making that an equivalent position to a firefighter paramedic. Again, we went back and pulled side-by-side comparison data. Those who had EMTs, the paramedic was always higher. So could you do these things? Absolutely. That is totally within your call. What we tried to do initially then is we went back and just looked at your data that you sent us from your payroll system. Both sides have 1 chief. The police has 2 majors. They have an assistant chief. You got sergeants and captains, corporals and lieutenants. So again, you've got a variety of folks going on in both of those disciplines or departments. And you got, if we're assuming that those corporals are supervisory, you got 13 supervisory people, total of 28 folks in that department versus 8 supervisory people and 23. I mean, those are internal equity considerations. They're not really data considerations. And so what we tried to do to kind of tee up this for discussion, and so I think this is a discussion you guys can have without us in the mix, because it really is internal equity. Darren, let's go look at the next slide for them to show you how we view the data. First of all, you only had one city that had both a fire lieutenant and a corporal, and that was Frontenac. And clearly in that particular case, they view them as equivalent, but it's one comparator. When you're looking at the 6 comparators that have both fire captains and police sergeants, once again, what you see is that fire captain, Clayton's is pretty darn close, but the rest of them are clearly, you know, it's a different range structure for them. So again, that's purely an internal equity call. And I would suggest that when we leave this call, these are the 3 positions that you guys really want to kick around and make a final decision on. 2 out of the 3, we don't have enough data to weigh in with an opinion. And the 3rd one, we're giving you the information. So you can then make a decision where you want to go from there. But your decision with the fire lieutenant versus corporal should have something to do or come into play with respect to how you do your sergeant to captain. So, but again, an internal equity kind of component here, not a data, not a market-driven decision. 2 out of the 3, we don't have enough data to weigh in on it. The 3rd one we do, but it could be influenced by what you decide to do with your corporal. So those are the, I know that we're really close on time here, pardon me. But I really think a really good use of your time once we leave, because it's my understanding we now have only one directive from you, which is to go run the 95th percentile and bring it back for comparison, 75th, 85th, and 95th. But you now have, I think, a real key decision here on standard deviation or no standard deviation. And then you've got to come back with these internal equity decisions. And then you've got a final, you know, kind of look at what you want to do on a go-forward basis. Did I miss anything for us, our takeaways for us to get done over the next week or so?
I mean, that sounds like a good recap to me. I'd like to see the numbers on the 95th percentile. And I think how we approach standard deviation and what you characterize as standard equity, internal equity issues are, we'll, once we decide, you'll fill in the numbers, or the numbers will appear consistent with our philosophy. Am I?
Correct.
I'm not on the screen. I'm not seeing, are there questions or observations in that regard? Anyone disagreeing with me?
Alderman Plufka has his hand raised.
Alderman Plufka.
That's a mistake. I apologize.
Are there any other, do we, you know, additional list of deliverables for Linda before she leaves for the 15th?
Just,
all right, I'm not seeing.
Just as a point of order, just so I'm clear, do we need to make a motion for them to run the numbers of the 95th, or is it because they're still within budget? It's just a directive, and
They're still within budget.
Okay.
If it would make you comfortable.
No, I'm good. I just wanted to make sure that, you know,
Yeah.
we didn't do something that then comes back and, oh, you didn't handle it correctly, you know.
No, I think that if there's consensus amongst the 3 members of the board that are present tonight, that you want to give her direction to go run the 95th percentile, then there's no vote necessary. But if one or 2 of you don't agree with that, then now might be a time to say
Well,
something.
I mean, I think I've already voiced my opinion that I don't know that I don't know that running the 95th is gonna get us some clarity that all of a sudden goes, oh, wow, let's do that. So I don't know that it's a necessary step. I don't disagree with Chairwoman Sims that it's nice to be able to run all the numbers and look at it on the board, but I think we've run a lot of numbers and looked at, and I think you add, the more data that we add within cutting it up just makes it more confusing, in my opinion, to then make all these minor decisions. I think there's some philosophical decisions that we should be making, and then, you know, go with it. But So I disagree with running the 95th. I don't know what. All the
Well, I would,
women-
if I could, I would say that all of this is prelude to when we are a full body of the board.
True.
And half of the board some years ago voted for the 95th percentile. And it's a column in a spreadsheet. Linda already indicated it's not, it wasn't onerous to run those figures. I would just assume see them, agree with them, disagree with them, ignore them, than not have them.
I would, if I could add my 2 cents. My bigger question is this going to go to the board and then we're going to have more questions that then Linda needs to go run, and we've exhausted everything with our committee, and then other members of the board have other questions. I think sort of philosophically, I can sort of guess we're between the 85th and the max. Like, yeah, there are probably a few more positions across the city that would go up. If we got to the full board and we said, oh yeah, 95th is our way to go, then Linda could run the numbers. I'm concerned that we get the other 4 members of the board involved in this discussion, and it's going to be 4 different decisions, and they might have more things for Linda to do. And I don't know what the contract says and how many more hours and time is left.
We're close. We're going to be very close, and then you all should consider we would have to amend the contract and allocate some more funds.
Yeah, I wouldn't support that directive then.
So do you want to do a roll call? Motion, second, roll call.
Well, I don't know that the chairwoman can make a motion to have that directive. It would have to come from either.
Right.
Right.
Well, how about this? I'll make a motion. Well, I guess, or do you, well,
It's a column on a spreadsheet.
oh, I agree. I'm all about, I'm all about numbers. I just think that when we add the other 4 members, they're going to ask another question, and then we're going to have to amend the contract with Linda, when I'm not sure it gives us enough substantial data to help us I feel like we're getting in the weeds with this, and the board needs to make a philosophical question or decision way up here up at the top, rather than running numbers. And I feel like we keep running numbers to try to solve issues that running the numbers isn't really going to solve.
But wouldn't it be good to have they would have these reports that would be available to them in advance of any kind of board meeting, so they could look at the columns and they could look like, oh wow, look at all of this. They've been laboring in the vineyard all this time trying to flush out what different philosophies look like, so when we take them up, we'll have a fully developed record.
How about I make a motion to have Linda Higbee and team run a 95% comparison to present to us at the April the 15th meeting.
And I guess, am I not permitted to second that? Or am I? I don't.
Kevin is online, so he can answer that question. Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah, that's it. Throw me in the middle.
Under the bus you go.
I don't believe the chair is in a position to make or second a motion, but I may be wrong, but I don't think so.
Well, looks like it dies for a lack of a second. So do we in that case have so is Linda needed to come back at the 15th meeting?
I think that there is need for the board, or the committee rather, to continue to have a discussion about the philosophy. What is the philosophy if it's not going to be the 75th? Will it be the 75th? Will it be 85th? Would it be highest of max? So, and I think that Linda adds value by being present for these discussions. So, and there are other items on the agenda tonight. Do you want her to do a calculation without standard deviation or standard deviation? And subsequently, then that helps the discussion on internal equity. So at 6:36, and Kevin O'Keefe is here, so I think it would be great for him to also talk about the email that I sent out earlier, so you all have a good sense, and ask him questions about one-time, what is it called, bonus, or what Kevin is calling retention incentive. And as a reminder, this reminds me of longevity pay, which back in, 2015, 16, the board asked us to remove that from the employee handbook as a benefit. So
Well, wait, hold on. I have a, so I'm not confused. So Linda still has to come back. And so she's still going to have to come back to the next meeting. So,
right, but she won't be running the 95th percentile. I'm asking her to come back because I don't believe her work is done.
so I mean, I'm just saying the incremental additional expense of having to come back anyway and adding a column on a 95th percentile, you all aren't willing to even see that?
I think we get 4 more people and we're gonna have like totally different things for Linda to do. And would just as soon do that. And if then the rest of the board wants to do 95th percent, we're not gonna pass this at the Board of Aldermen in one meeting. There's no way. We can't even come to agreement with 3 of us here on this call. So I feel like we're gonna have Linda doing a lot more stuff and we could run the column later and have her do other things. So that's my opinion on my motion.
Well, look, I know Darren has to go because he's on something else right now, but I'd just like to make a comment before, yeah, Darren, go ahead and drop off. You need to get out of there. But I would like to suggest that, again, some common terminology is really.
She went mute.
Uh-oh.
Went with them. Oh, no, there she is.
No, but she's talking and can't be heard.
I think it's through, she's through his audio
I
somehow.
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll send her a quick text. Is she back? Linda? I sent her the text.
It might be because she signed on as him.
Right.
Well, I guess at this time, I did say I would recognize if there are either of the chiefs, if they had something that they wanted to add. Are they still on, or is that something that interests them to do?
Chief Spees has his hand raised.
Okay, Chief Spees?
Thank you, Alderwoman Sims. We really appreciate the effort all of you are putting into these conversations. Obviously, it's taking hours to do. I was the one that raised the question about the internal equity question between the police and fire department. And just to be clear, I just want to make sure everybody's clear that we fully support the fire department, fully support what they're making. But as I looked at Linda Higby's comparative study, one of the things I did was, and shame on me for not doing this before 3 years as chief here, I pulled the job descriptions from the police department, and then I pulled them from the fire department, and I looked at them. And then I pulled the numbers of what the salary were between both fire and police. And really the things that just jumped out at me were the comparative pay between the fire captains and police sergeants that were extremely close in job titles. Obviously they do different things every day, but their missions were very close for the city of Brentwood. And our sergeants were making almost $8,000 less than that position in the fire side. Same way with the corporals. They were making $6,000 less than the equivalent title of lieutenant in the Brentwood Police Department. And my question to Linda was, how can we do an external study of salary for police and fire when, in my eyes, the internal equity piece is missing before we even do that? So I raised that question with Bola, and I appreciate my boss sending it on and allowing us to discuss it with you. And by the way, one of the things that, and I did call Ronnie and discuss the fact that their senior firefighters were paid a little less than our police officers were. So there were incongruities that we noted on both sides. But the one that really jumped out at me were our police lieutenants and corporals that we count on to make key decisions and do many, many things to keep the community safe and our officers safe on a daily basis. It's a really challenging job. And I'm not saying that the fire side supervisors aren't in a challenging position, but this difference in pay makes no sense to me, and I really appreciate the fact that we get an opportunity to present it and discuss it.
Bola, might this topic of, what I kind of view maybe a structural change, this internal, what we've labeled it, this internal equity amongst the positions, be something that public safety could noodle on?
I don't think so.
Oh,
It's ways
okay, great.
compensation.
All right, fair enough.
Can I echo with Alderwoman Sims, because I've never served on public safety. So, I guess I can learn what maybe I should know in depth what all the different folks in our two departments do job by job. And maybe that's what I should be doing as a member of Ways and Means, but I don't have that knowledge. So I just wondered if.
Yeah, I happen to sit on public safety, but we make decisions about what things to prioritize, and then they come over to Ways and Means about whether it can be funded. Is there?
I think if you move it to public safety, you're still going to need Linda, which is why I thought. I obviously both chiefs can speak to it, but the root really goes to the content of the job description. And that was what Linda was trying to say. So that's a good place to start. But if the job descriptions don't align, then you do a reorganization and change those positions, particularly in the police department, to something higher, like a lieutenant and a sergeant. That's how you will probably begin to achieve the kind of salary numbers that you're looking to achieve. And I think it's critical that Linda be part of this conversation as well, whether it's here or public safety.
Since we, I certainly don't want to, I think she did an abridged presentation on that issue for purposes of time. So I would just assume we'll take that up more at length at the next meeting, but is it possible to, in advance of that, I want to have an understanding of what these positions are, and if, in terms of responsibilities, and are they in fact, are they the same as the referenced fire position? Is there a job description?
That she wasn't able to show you tonight that addresses that. So you were right, an abridged presentation. Because Jason and I briefly met with them earlier today. So she fast-tracked everything for you tonight, given their limited time. But we can definitely continue that if you want at the next meeting.
Can I chime in one thing on that?
Sure, Jason.
Okay, just one to be clear, Linda's not the one that necessarily determines this is the corresponding job description to the position within our comparator cities. The way that Linda puts forth the presentation, or the request rather, initially would be the job descriptions are included, and then those comparator cities look at the job descriptions and compare them to their own job descriptions. So the difference between those and what winds up on our report is based upon the information provided back to Linda from our comparator cities using our own job descriptions. And at the very beginning of this process, before any of our job descriptions were sent to Linda, the request was made from my office to all of our department heads to make sure that if there were any modifications or changes that needed to be made to the job descriptions ahead of that, to be done. And then any of those that were indeed modified, which there were several, were forwarded on to Linda. And that was what was used to be sent out to our comparators when they looked at their own job descriptions versus ours.
Alderman Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I think the concern, though, that I'm hearing from Chief Speece is not job descriptions based on our comparators, but job descriptions based on equity from similar positions that reside in our fire department and similar positions that are in our own internal police department. And are those job descriptions, equitable in that sense? And then should we look at the salary ranges within those to make sure that they're comparative? I don't know that it has anything to do with our comparator cities until we get that solved. So it's almost two separate issues that we're talking about here in order to get a true accuracy of a comparator to what those ranges end up becoming.
Chairwoman Sims. Chief Cottrell has his hand raised.
Oh, Chief Cottrell?
Can you hear me now?
Unless I'm misunderstanding the request from Chief.
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Alderwoman Sims. I just want to expand a little bit on what Chief Speaks, the direction he was started in on changing the classification. So bigger scope or bigger slice is in St. Louis County, there's nearly 1,600 firefighters. So we have 23. They know nearly 1,600. They compare themselves to nearly 1,600 on a daily basis. Of those 1,600, 82% are firefighter paramedics. So comparing our firefighter EMTs is becoming more and more difficult every day because those positions are not being refilled. Those are legacy positions, and those at Brentwood, we do not have a firefighter EMT that has less than 22 years of service to the city. So that's one piece where we're trying to lump those two categories together. We will never hire another firefighter EMT at Brentwood. We will only hire firefighter paramedics. And as they're promoted, they're not recognized for having their paramedic license either. So we have officers who are EMT licensed, and they're paid the same as their counterparts who are paramedics. So I think we can work with those categories just a little bit. One thing I'll finish with this statement. So obviously, I know we have well-compensated employees. Our department is a team department. They do everything in unison. They have to. In August, we ran a call for a COVID patient and they successfully treated this patient. 2 of our members contracted COVID from that incident. One of those members has yet to return to work, nor has he had a pay increase in 10 years. That is something as the chief that I feel truly needs to be addressed. We lost the longevity pay at a recommendation, and I'm just trying to give you some history of why there's so much conversation concerning public safety. There's a lot of these jobs in St. Louis County, and when we are compared to 4 other municipalities, it's difficult to understand how they don't move, how the ranges aren't increased when there's 42 different agencies in St. Louis County. And I know it's apples to oranges, but 4 just does not seem reasonable. Thank you.
Chief Speaks, you still have the hand icon raised. Do you have?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to reiterate Alderman Gould's point, and yeah, that's how I understood Ms. Higby's position on that too, Alderman, was I think the board needs to look at this, what she was referring to as internal equity first, because there's no point in doing an outside study of police officers if you don't do an internal study of equity here. So, and that was really the point of my contention here was, could the board take a look at internally these job descriptions? Hey, the police and fire job descriptions of these positions are going to be, obviously their actual duties are going to be different because we have different jobs with the mission of doing public safety. But if you look at it from a supervisory overview, they're very closely aligned in terms of what their responsibilities are to the city and their work. And that's what we would appreciate you looking at. But that's how I heard it too.
So, Bull, I guess in terms of action items for the next meeting, whatever information we can gather. So I want to be able to educate myself in terms of these job descriptions and you know what the chief is saying. And I don't know if that wherever, I hope there's a file somewhere.
We do. We've updated with his help. the job descriptions, so we can provide to the board the job descriptions for all positions in both departments. Is that what you would like to see?
I think that sounds like it. Alderman Gould?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the positions that are in, contention, but I would also add to Chairwoman Sims' directive of, I'd like for Jason and the staff to come to the board with a recommendation, because I don't know that the board is equipped enough to be able to provide an intelligent solution to the problem that the departments are having. That's only something I think the staff can provide to the board for us to consider and vote on. So that would be my direction.
I would agree with that. If that was a motion, I'll second it. If it needs a
Okay.
motion.
I mean, I'm about I'm about information collecting, so.
Information collecting and then a recommendation based on that information so that we can make an informed decision.
Okay, so we have 2 items here. I thought there was a third.
Is there a third?
Let's see.
Well, if I went back to one of my early questions, one of my questions is I mean, I see what the financial impact is for 1 year, but if we could, I know we project the budget out for a few years, and if we could look at what the projections are to the budget of making these sort of global decisions, not getting down to these specific jobs, but the global 75th, the 85th, and we could even do max, although,
Okay,
and
so
what that would do to the percentage of budget that would be consumed by salaries.
Okay, so total compensation cost
Right,
as a result of any one of these 3.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I've somewhat lost track of are we still on 5B or the old 3A? Because it's not been,
3, we're on 5B.
so wait, hold on, I just got locked out. Are there other issues? So Bola, do you have clearer direction in terms of?
Well, we have still left on, sorry for interrupting, but I think we still have the legal opinion on lump sum merit. Is that correct?
Right,
Yes.
and I wasn't sure if that was part of.
That's part of 5B.
5B.
Okay, are we ready to move on to that? Bola, are you clear with what?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so I guess the next top part of that topic is the lump sum component, and Mr. O'Keefe, the floor is yours.
Well, the question, as I understood it, was that there was consideration to giving a lump sum pay adjustment to personnel rather than changing the base recurring year after year. And it was observed to me that some other cities do that and essentially award a bonus to employees to avoid increasing the base for the long-term consequences. And I mentioned to Bola that the Missouri Constitution prohibits that. And I think she may have forwarded my email to you where it's Article 3, Section 28, 39, whatever the hell it is, sub C, which says that you cannot give public employees additional compensation after they've performed service. So if you're talking about a lump sum payment for, and I think the term was used, merit, right, which means you've done a good job, here's a bunch of money, or a bucket of money, or some sum of money, then you are rewarding people additional compensation for work they have performed. And that violates the Constitution. So what I suggested is, if you want to devise some system for making a lump sum adjustment to salary for some people based on whatever criteria you select, that a way to deal with the constitutional prohibition against rewarding people for past service, additional sums other than what they agreed to work for, is to require them to do something more to get it. And in this instance, what the something more would be to stay in the city's employment. So that on December 1st, the incentivized employees would get 3% or whatever it is as a retention compensation for having stayed with the city. And that is therefore compensation for services or work performed after the system was set up, and they achieve it by staying there. So you keep the experienced personnel, those who you've spent money training or time getting efficiency and experience of being in your employ, and you can set that up. So if you're going to look to do something like that, I would suggest that's the way to do it, as opposed to saying everybody gets 2%, but it doesn't count towards your future pay, because that is compensation for past services. However, and this is not a legal issue, but a practical matter, in my opinion, employees never accept the premise that their pay is likely or may go down in the future. And if you tell somebody you're going to get $50,000 plus 5%, and that means your pay is $5,250 for this year if you stay to December 1st, when you tell them their pay next year is $50,000 and not $5,250, you've got a workforce problem and you have a morale problem. I think it is unrealistic to think that one-time payments can go away. I think you need to respectfully suggest you need to bite the bullet as to whether your compensation structure is appropriate in light of the market, the skills. It's all the stuff I've just listened to you talking about. But that one-time payments are a Band-Aid, and it may be appropriate when the city's in, severe financial straits or uncertain future. That may have been something to do last year when you didn't know what in the hell 2020 was going to be. But you sort of weathered that storm, and there's obviously some uncertainty about 21, but at least thus far it doesn't appear to be critical. So I would just make that observation, that one-time payments are a fairly artificial solution to the question of whether or not your workforce is adequately compensated. But if you're going to do it, make them do something to earn it, as opposed to saying we're boosting you because your merit evaluation says you did a good job, so now you're getting another $2,000.
Alderman
Yes,
Gould.
Yes, thank you for that. I think the concern that you're sharing is a valid concern, in that, merit spot bonuses, however you call them in the corporate world, they really break down when employees come to expect them every year, because then you might as well just change their base, right? And so, in my opinion, if it's if it's to recognize the very hardship kind of conditions that some of our employees had to work in over the past year, is it legal to use any of the federal funding that we've received for support, COVID relief support, or anything like that, for providing some sort of, that because they earned that by working in this environment, but it's not something I think we should ever consider making almost like a commission, like, oh, if you meet these levels, then you're guaranteed this every year, because then it adds to the budget permanently, which is, again, what I don't think we can afford to do at the moment.
Yeah, we are all waiting for guidance on the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, and the RFR, the Federal Relief Funds, FRF, Federal Relief Funds, and their adequate use. But one of the things that I believe says we can use it for is to give raises to first responders who have been on the front lines. But that is a raise going forward. That is, because under the state constitution, the feds may say you can use this money for this purpose, but the state constitution says you can't pay somebody for work they've already performed.
So are the municipalities that we have some evidence that they have been, or at least Linda, suggests that they have been using a merit-based bonus system for those that are at the ceiling of their pay scale. Are they violating the Constitution at the moment? I mean, how are they doing it?
I don't know how they can do it in a way that comports with the constitutional limitations. And I'd be happy to have somebody show me how they do it. And I will tell you that there are some HR lawyers who are so used to negotiating contracts with labor unions and making pay retroactive to the when the previous contract expired, that they say just do it. And I still have never gotten an adequate answer from them about how is that legal. But there's a certain practicality on the part of some, and the private sector experience of labor management, negotiation, and contract development, I think doesn't always serve people well in the public employment sector in that respect. I don't want to criticize them because I don't know exactly what they've done. There may be some papering over. They may have effective lipstick on this pig. I just don't know where they got it.
Alderwoman Tice.
So I'm going to go back to what Kevin just said about the expectation that once you get the 5% one year, you're always going to get 5%. And I know it's another apples to oranges, but in the corporate world, it's pretty common that once you get to your max, then if there's a cost, and granted it's cost of living and we don't really do that, but when there's a cost of living, you might, like one year you might get 3%, one year you might get 1%, one year you might not get anything, but there's the expectation that your salary is your salary, but then if there's money in the budget for people who are at the max, they get paid it that year, but it's not the same every year. Am I missing something that we can't do that philosophy here, or what?
If the terms of compensation are, you will receive the amount specified in our ordinance plus cost of living, then that is the term set at the beginning of the year. But then you also owe them that cost of living adjustment, regardless of anything else. So, what you can't do is pay for work already done. But if you say the terms of compensation are $50,000 plus cost of living, then you can do that. But that is also a change to the base, because cost of living adjustments change the base. Now my pay is $50,000 plus 2.5%.
Yeah, I guess I'm just used to other entities who somehow don't change the base. Like if you're at the max, you can't go over the max, but you can get, I don't know what, the bonus or something that comes in. So I guess I'm trying to apply something that works in a private sector, doesn't have to deal with the constitution of a state.
Well, that's true. I mean, this limitation does not apply to private sector employers.
Right.
They can do any damn thing they want other than wage and hour law violations and that sort of.
So Kevin, just so I have it through my thick skull, if we wanted to, hey, you did a great job.
I know better than that. Come on.
So if you said, hey, you did a great job this year, I want to give you a bonus for that reason, violates Constitution. But I'm hearing from you that there's a way we could, I don't want to say be cute with the language, but call it a retention benefit going forward, or some kind of, hey, we want to retain you, and so in the future we're going to pay you X. But the problem with that is those things don't go away often. So that's the risk.
They do go away, and that's the problem, because employees think, well, I got 52.5 last year, so I'm starting 2022 at 52.5. That's what my pay was last year. So that's my assumption of my pay. Because when you roll it back, when you say that was that is no longer part of your pay, I think you're going to have serious morale problems. But that's just a practical consideration. That's
So we'd face issues of, okay, you made 55,000 in 2022 and now 2023, well, it's going to be back down to 50. And that's where we would find morale problems, for lack of a better.
I think you may have retention issues. I think you have morale problems, and how you decide, by the way, who gets what may be another point of conflict.
Alderman Gould.
But so yes, the morale issue that you might have at the beginning of the year, but if the person has intent to stay toward the prize at the end, the way that it's structured, then yes, then you would have it as an ongoing implication to the budget, right? You wouldn't renegotiate that every year.
What I understand you're talking about is a one-time.
Okay.
So we're not saying everybody gets 50,000 plus a retention at the end of the year. Otherwise, you've just raised the base.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get to an understanding.
So if it's a one-time,
as a one-time thing, we could legally and according to the Constitution do this moving forward for next year, for example. But after that, it's kind of, that's it, right? So then you've created another problem by trying to solve something that, I feel like the problem we're talking about is not, the majority of our staff is not the problem we're talking about. We're talking about, five or six employees, or I don't know what the number is, that have been for extended period of time at the highest part of their pay range. And, I've seen this in the corporate world as well. So it's not, just something that happens in municipalities, but in my advice to the people that were at that point in the corporate world was be blessed that you've had it for as long as you've had. So I have a hard time, and there are job now if we need to talk about equity and shifting those pay ranges because of department to department, I think that is an absolute discussion that needs to be had. But I have a hard time trying to make major shifts because of a few at the very top, unless I'm misunderstanding the problem. I want to make sure that I'm clear on the problem.
There's more than 5 or 6. Okay. I think it's half of police and fire, and just
well, maybe it was just the Higbee report that said like 5 or 6 that gave me that notion. So
right.
Sorry.
And so quickly, the kind of structure that the city had in its compensation plan when I was hired, when you reached I think it was like 26th step. I don't really remember accurately. You just move down, to the next highest, wherever that is. So you are aware of this. We either have a truly structured compensation, which is how this started, then one that's just very fluid and means nothing, one that's backed by a philosophy of the board, one that accounts for internal equity. So those are things, and this one-time bonus wouldn't be available, and Mr. O'Keefe, please interject, it would only be to those who've reached the top of their pay class, right? It wouldn't be for every employee, or could it?
You can structure the program however you wish. It's just the point that whoever's going to get it has to meet whatever criteria you establish. So, much like some drop programs and things like that, if you can establish the criteria of who's eligible, as long as it's a reasonable basis, doesn't discriminate, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with one-time payments overall, and I was thinking of it when Alderman Gould was telling me, it's a bit of a whack-a-mole problem, because when you whack it over here, we'll give you one time and we'll bang that head down. It's going to pop up over here. It's like, what about me next year?
To put it into perspective, we currently have 34 people that fall into this category, 7 of which are not within the public safety. So the remaining 27 are.
Okay, thank you.
However, depending on which way you choose to go with the plans, it may be amended for 2021, but we may be back there again in 2022.
Alderwoman Sims. Chief Cottrell has his hand raised.
Oh, Chief Cottrell.
My apologies, that was an error.
Okay.
Are there other questions on this topic? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you for that presentation. The
No problem.
Constitution can be pesky sometimes.
I'm sorry?
I said the Constitution can be pesky sometimes.
Damn Constitution. All those rights and everything. Okay, am I needed any longer? Am I?
I don't think so.
Okay. Happy April Fool's Day, everyone. And I wasn't kidding about that.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you.
Bye.
Are there other, did we cover 5B? Are there other issues to address?
Not in 5B. So
Okay, so item number 5C is the continued discussion on the compensation and benefit study report, vacation benefits, new hires and departures, and life insurance and AD&D caps. Who's got that?
Jason.
That would be me. So I provided 3 different memos there. I don't necessarily, I'm not going to go through and read them word for word, but to kind of give you a brief summary, one of the things that I was trying to interject earlier on was one of the memos, the one regarding public safety hiring and terminations. This will give you an indication of the new hires and the terminations for our public safety employees from 2017 on. And I just picked that time frame because I have all that data, since that mirrors my tenure with the city. That would kind of give you an indication of who left and for what reason, and then likewise who we'd hired and from what municipality, agency, entity, what have you, during that same time frame for both police and fire. Again, that's more informational. I believe Alderman Gould had asked a couple of questions regarding that, so he may find that to be of interest. If you want me to go through it in greater detail, I can, but again, it was just more for your benefit and edification so that you had that information at hand.
Are there questions on that memo? I'm not seeing any, Jason, so you can continue.
Okay.
Actually, I have a quick one. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes,
ma'am.
So I would actually be, I don't need an exhaustive list like this, but I'd be curious on non-uniform employees if it's similar numbers. I don't need you to spend a long time going through every employee, but
well, the difficulty would be telling you where everybody went, because that's not necessarily always known to me.
Okay.
Within these kind of communities, it's a little bit easier to make that determination. We do lose a lot of non-uniformed employees to other municipalities. Again, there is what they call the municipal shuffle, and I hate to put it in those terms, but you have people that will go from organization to organization. We lose people to the city of Ladue, and we'll hire them from Kirkwood and what have you, and that happens across the board for most of our employee populace in one form or another. We see it most often in public works and in our parks employees.
so, and just to get a sense, do they typically move because of a higher hourly wage at the same job, or are they moving to a higher level job than
When individuals tell me, generally speaking, it is one of a few things. Compensation is obviously one of those. Another would be for a position change, which might also be classified under the compensation side. Another, and we've lost a couple of our police officers to this, to be closer to home, to where they're home. For the police officers, obviously patrolling your own community is something that is highly desirable. And so I know for a fact that we've lost at least 2 of our police officers for those types of reasons. They went to St. Charles as an example. But we do see those are the primary reasons. In rare occurrence, people leave just to change career fields. And we've had that across the board too. We had one of our long-term firefighters left to go to the IT field. That never happens.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
The secondary memo that I had there was to address the concern that the board had in relation to the Higbee report regarding our vacation policy or lack thereof on the first year of employment. And I do want to kind of clarify one thing with the language within the handbook. We have allowed employees to take vacation in their first year. However, it comes off of the allotment that they receive at the end of that year. So in essence, they're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. We allow them to take a week after 6 months, and then they get their second week after they've been here for a year, but then they don't have that bank replenished until 2 years out. So in essence, you're affording an individual a 2-week vacation for the first 2 years that they are with the city. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. The policy change, the way that I had reworded our employee handbook, or the portion of the employee handbook that relates to vacation, was to allow employees to receive actual vacation during their first year. And the way that I had changed the verbiage was to add that line for each of the categories. And the reason we have different categories is because it accrues at a different rate for non-uniformed employees, for fire service employees, and for police service employees. And I wanted to make sure that the language represented that. And in essence, what we would require would be half of said allotment after a 3-month span, the remaining of said allotment after the 6-month span, and then their bank would replenish after 1 calendar year. From a finance standpoint, I should point out there really and truly is no financial impact, because we're going to be paying the employee whether they're present or not. This just simply allows that employee to be compensated when they're not here. In essence, what a vacation is. So my request to the board, or to the committee, would be to allow me to take this to the full board, and the next time we have a modification to the handbook, to insert this language, but to allow perhaps this to go into effect ahead of that time, so that we don't have to wait until I have enough items to revise the handbook. Were there any questions about the language that I put forth in this memo?
Alderman Gould.
Yes. So about how many employees do we have on staff that sort of fit in this? I know this would be a policy moving forward, but how much of our workforce is this sort of first year right now?
At any given time, it's less than 10%. I would say 10 to 12%. We have 107 full-time employees. Generally speaking, we have about 14 new hires in the full-time capacity over the course of a calendar year. I do want to point out that a lot of times when those folks come in from managerial type of roles, or more seasoned employees, they do negotiate this in. So even the folks that are currently within their first year, this wouldn't necessarily apply to them, because they've already negotiated that in their offer letter that we gave to them.
Right. And then my second follow-up on that is, do we ever have resourcing issues with work staff, as far as I mean, as long as we're not running into, a significant amount of people trying to take vacation, I don't see why we wouldn't make this amendment.
The only time that it really comes into play, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but would probably be on the police and fire side, simply because they have minimum staffing requirements, and they do have some very tenured employees. So those tenured employees tend to have a higher amount of vacation. But the way that they offset that is their vacation resets on a calendar year, and then in December, or something to that effect, they pick based on seniority when they're going to be off for the subsequent year. So that can be planned out, but then injuries or illnesses or COVID, things like that, can potentially impact those numbers. But for our other departments, it typically is not an issue staffing wise. Did that address that concern?
Yep, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess at this point, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the vacation policy change as set forth in the proposed amendment to the handbook, section 7.0 2 as attached to the memo.
So
To take
moved.
to the full board.
Yeah, to the full board.
So moved.
Second.
I guess, do we need a roll call on that? So roll call.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice,
Yes.
members agree. Vote is 3
Agreed
to
on something.
Great. Accomplishment. All right, what's next, Jason?
Okay, the next one, and hopefully I can get through this relatively quickly, but was again based on the recommendation that came from Ms. Higney last week rather, with regards to potentially modifying our offering for life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment, or it's also called AD&D. We currently offer $50,000 of life and AD&D to all of our employees. The recommendation was made to make that in an incremental amount based on the employee's salary to be competitive with our comparators. And the way I was looking at this to still be cost effective would be 2 times an employee's annual salary, capping at $150,000. So even our lowest paid employee under this guideline would see an increase to the amount of benefit that they have. And then our higher end employees would also see a benefit, but that benefit would be then capped at the $150,000 level. So basically any employee earning at or above $75,000, they would see their benefit go from $50,000 all the way up to $150,000. Anybody below $75,000 would see it increase from $50,000 to twice their annual. I can only provide an approximation of what the cost of this would be, because this would require going to our life insurance company to give us some underwriting on this. And what may be a factor in the ultimate cost would be, at this dollar figure, it would be more dependent upon the employee's actual age. Typically, when you exceed $100,000 in benefit, the age factors in as opposed to being a flat rate. So we could see, or we would see an increase. My estimation of that increase would be approximately 2.5 times what this benefit currently costs. To put it in grander terms, we only pay as an organization about $15,000 for these benefits across the board for all of our full-time employees. Now, we also pay short and long-term disability. Each of these policies is separate from that, but the life and the AD&D portion is about $15,000 a year. I would estimate that this would then go up to about $35,000 to potentially $40,000 a year, depending on how the underwriting plays out. What I am looking for from this entity, this committee, would be the permission to go forth to our provider to give us a formal quote based on our employee populace.
Questions? Alderwoman Tice.
So I have a question, and Linda's gone, but and I just was trying to pull up her report. So do our competitor cities ask employees to make some sort of contribution to this?
Typically, they do not. This is typically a company paid benefit. A lot of times when you see employers, and I'm just speaking from experience. I've been in HR for about 24 years. Typically, when an employer asks an employee to participate, it is for for the long and the short-term disability. We cover those benefits as well. But usually when you ask an employee to participate in that, it raises the benefit cap for those types of benefits, and it also changes the taxation on the back end should an employee receive that benefit. Life insurance and AD&D is generally something that's flat rate offered. If an employee wishes to exceed what the organization offers, they have the option to purchase supplemental life insurance. And we currently do that not only through Lincoln, but also through Colonial Life Insurance. And we don't have a whole lot of takers on that. We have a few, but not a whole lot.
You turn to page 41 of Linda's presentation from last week. He actually does recommend what Jason is presenting, modify the life insurance to multiples of pay. What she doesn't say in here is just how many. So the data supporting that recommendation, we could ask her for it if you would like to see it, but it seems to be consistent with what Jason's saying.
No, I don't need her to look that. I'll make a motion, except I just saw Jeff's hand.
Well, go ahead. I was going to make, if the recommendation was to, for HR to seek a quote, then I think that's a motion I'd make.
Then I'll second it.
Great.
Okay, all right, so we have a motion from Alderman Gould to proceed on the recommendation and move it on to the board, and a second from Alderwoman Tice. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Vote is 3-0.
Great, motion carries.
Thank you.
Jason, did you have anything else?
No, I think I'm good. I've worn out my welcome.
That's not possible. Okay, great. So that concludes section 5. Section 6, we don't have any department reports. Item 7 on the agenda is citizen comments. Is there anyone in the citizenry who'd like to come forward and make a comment? Not seeing any hand raised, lots of no nods. Okay,
No
moving on.
hands.
Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
particularly for the additional time. It's an important topic, so we're doing the work. I appreciate the time and the effort.
Next meeting's on
And
the
I'll see you on Monday.
Bye.
Bye.